She fled her wedding and jumped into a stranger's car. He ended up being the mafia boss who saved her life. Rain fell like a curtain of silver over Manhattan, washing the streets in blurred reflections of neon and traffic lights. The city looked alive and cruel at once, its pulse thundering beneath the storm. Isabella Hale ran barefoot across Fifth Avenue, her wedding gown torn and heavy with rain. The silk clung to her skin like a shroud. Her breath came out in sharp gasps. Behind her, voices shouted through the downpour, men in black suits, her fiancé's security detail. "Miss Hale! Stop! You're making a mistake!" Their words were drowned by the roar of thunder. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her heels were gone, her hair plastered to her face, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. The bouquet she'd been forced to hold lay somewhere in the gutter. The traffic light ahead turned red. Through the blur of rain, she saw a black SUV idling alone at the intersection. She didn't think. She just ran to it, slammed her hands on the window. "Please!" she screamed. "Hey, please drive! They're going to kill me!" The driver turned. A man in a dark coat, tattoos winding up his neck, eyes sharp enough to cut through the storm. The city lights glinted off the silver ring on his hand as he lowered the window halfway. His gaze swept over her. Wet gown, shaking hands, desperation in her voice. "Do you even know whose car you just climbed into?" His tone was calm, almost bored, but there was something dangerous beneath it. "I don't care," she said, panting on, "just drive." For a beat, he held her eyes. Then, without another word, he leaned forward and slammed his foot on the gas. Tires screamed against wet asphalt. The SUV lurched forward, fishtailing through the intersection as horns blared behind them. Isabella fell into the seat, clutching her skirt to her chest. The man's focus didn't waver. He took the next corner on instinct, then another, weaving through side streets like a shadow that knew every escape route in the city. In the rearview mirror, the headlights chasing them began to fade. "Seatbelt," he said flatly. She fumbled to obey, heart hammering. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. The rain hammered harder, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. The inside of the car smelled faintly of smoke and leather. On the console, she caught sight of a pistol, half hidden under a black jacket. Her stomach turned, but she stayed silent. After a few blocks, the man slowed, eyes flicking to the side mirrors. They were clear. He took a sudden turn down a narrow side street and pulled over under an overpass. The only sound was the rain and the distant hum of the city. Isabella sat there, trembling. Her throat was raw. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't look at her. Instead, he reached behind the seat and tossed something toward her, a black leather jacket. "Put that on," he said. She blinked, confused. "Why?" His eyes met hers through the shadows. "Do you want to escape from that damn crowd behind?" Her fingers shook as she pulled the jacket over her soaked gown. It was warm, faintly smelling of gunpowder and rain. "Who were they?" he asked finally, his voice low. "My fiancé's men," she said. "They were supposed to take me to the reception. I ran." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Not a lot of people run from men like that and live long enough to tell the story. I guess I'm not most people," she whispered. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe respect. Then the engine rumbled again. "Where are we going?" she asked. He shifted the gear. "Somewhere they won't find you." The SUV merged back into the storm, water spraying up from the tires as the skyline swallowed them. Through the window, the city blurred into streaks of light, gold, red, blue. Isabella leaned back, the leather jacket heavy on her shoulders, her heartbeat slowly matching the rhythm of the rain. For the first time since she'd run, she felt the smallest flicker of safety, one born not of trust, but of instinct. She turned to look at him once more. The tattoos on his hands caught the dashboard light, curling into symbols she didn't recognize. His jaw was hard, his eyes unreadable, but there was a quiet steadiness in his grip on the wheel. Who was this man? She didn't know. All she knew was that the farther they drove from her old life, the closer she was to something she didn't understand, something that felt dangerously like freedom. And in the blur of rain and neon, the runaway bride sat beside a stranger who would soon become the only person left who could save her life. The storm followed them out of Manhattan, softening into a steady drizzle as the city lights disappeared behind. The highway stretched empty and gray, lined with warehouses and the skeletons of abandoned factories. Damien drove without a word, the wipers scraping rhythmically across the glass. The only sound inside the car was the engine's low growl and Isabella's uneven breathing. She clutched his jacket tighter around her shoulders, watching the dark veins of ink winding up his neck and vanishing beneath his shirt collar. On his hand, the same emblem repeated, a serpent curled around a dagger. It looked ancient, deliberate, a mark of belonging. Her gaze drifted to the passenger seat floor. A half-open duffel bag, the metallic glint of ammunition, a compact pistol box, a silver flash drive taped to a folder stamped confidential. Panic rose in her throat. "Where are we going?" she asked. Damien didn't look at her. "Someplace quiet." He turned off the main road, tires crunching over gravel as the SUV slipped onto a narrow path flanked by overgrown weeds. At the end stood an old brick warehouse, its windows shattered, its roof sagging from time. He parked under a rusted awning and killed the engine. The silence pressed against them. Isabella swallowed hard. Why here? Because no one asks questions in places already forgotten. He got out of the car, rain dripping off his hair and jacket. She hesitated before following him, her gown dragging through puddles. Inside, the warehouse smelled of dust and gasoline. A single hanging bulb flickered weakly above an old work table cluttered with maps, burner phones, and thick binders. She froze at the sight of the weapons laid out in neat lines, handguns, spare magazines, and a black case the size of a briefcase. Her voice trembled. Are you some kind of criminal?" Damien looked up from the table, his expression unreadable. "Your definition of crime is also rich. Someone who keeps guns in their car and hides in abandoned buildings." As she spoke, she grabbed her skirt tightly, reflexively stepping back. A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. "Then yes, I suppose that fits, but don't worry." He reached for the case, snapped it open. "I'm not in the mood to kill you tonight." The words should have scared her, but the calm way he said them was stranger than any threat. He turned the briefcase toward her. Inside were rows of neatly labeled drives, stacks of cash, and documents with corporate seals. He pulled one file free, flipped it open, and slid it across the table. Numbers, transaction codes, signatures of men she recognized from charity galas and political fundraisers. "These," Damien said quietly, "are proof that your country's favorite saints are laundering cartel money through logistics companies. Every major shipment passes through their docks." Her eyes widened as she skimmed a page. The letterhead read Walco Shipping Group. Her heart stopped. That was Ethan's family business. She shook her head. "That's impossible." He arched a brow. "Is it?" She scanned more pages, her pulse racing. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, fake trade manifests, all connecting back to Ethan Walters. The same man she'd nearly married 6 hours ago. "My father," she whispered. He presided over a case like this years ago. He put people away for it." Damien's gaze sharpened. "Robert Hale." She looked up, startled. "You know him?" "I know his name," he said curtly, closing the file. "And the kind of justice he sells." Her chest tightened. "My father isn't for sale." Damien met her eyes for the first time since they'd left the city. His stare was cool, assessing, almost pitying. "Then he's the only man in New York who isn't." He turned away, pulling a burner phone from his pocket and making a short call in Italian. His voice dropped low, almost melodic, before he hung up. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. "Someone who doesn't exist on paper. Why did you show me that file?" "Because," he said, shutting the briefcase with a snap, "I wanted to see if you were like the rest of them." She took a step back. "And what do you think?" He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Jury's still out." Lightning flashed outside, throwing his shadow against the wall. Tall, deliberate, untouchable. Isabella turned away, her thoughts spinning. The fiancé she'd trusted was a criminal. The man who'd saved her was worse, or maybe better. All she knew was that nothing in her world was clean anymore. And as the storm rolled over the city, the runaway bride realized she had leapt from one kind of danger straight into another. The kind with dark eyes, steady hands, and a name whispered in fear. Damien Moretti. The deal went wrong the moment the headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Damien swore under his breath, jerking the wheel. The black SUV swerved hard as gunfire cracked through the rain. Bullets shattered the passenger window, glass spraying across Isabella's lap. She screamed, ducking instinctively, clutching the seatbelt like a lifeline. "Stay down!" Damien barked, spinning the car into a side street. Tires screeched, water exploded from puddles, sirens wailed in the distance. "Who are they?" she gasped. "People who don't take broken deals kindly." He hit the brakes, then accelerated again, zigzagging through the maze of alleys until the pursuing headlights vanished into the storm. Only when silence returned did he finally slow, breathing hard through gritted teeth. Blood ran down his shoulder. "Damien, you're hit." "It's nothing," he muttered, pressing his palm against the wound. But his knuckles whitened. He made a sharp turn into an empty block of derelict buildings. The SUV's tires crunched to a stop in front of a half-collapsed apartment tower, its windows boarded up. Damien grabbed the duffel bag and opened her door. "Move." Isabella hesitated. "Here?" He gave a grim half-smile. "Home, sweet home." They climbed the stairwell, lit only by moonlight through cracks in the boards. Inside one apartment, old furniture lay under dusty sheets, and the air smelled of rust and stale cigarettes. Damien kicked a chair aside and pulled open a false panel beneath the sink. Inside, a metal box, some cash, a first aid kit, and a tiny gas stove. "Sit," he said. "I'm fine," she lied. Her dress was torn, her arms covered in bruises, but she knelt beside him anyway when he slumped onto a chair. The blood on his shoulder had seeped through his shirt. "Take it off," she said softly. He hesitated, then peeled the fabric away, revealing a clean bullet graze. Isabella's hands trembled as she dabbed at the wound with alcohol. He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. "Why don't you go to a hospital?" He gave a dry laugh. "Hospitals ask questions. I've had enough of those." Her brow furrowed. "Aren't you afraid I'll tell the police?" "Police?" He met her eyes, voice low. "They sold my father out 10 years ago. There's no one left to call." The words lingered in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time, Isabella saw more than tattoos and shadows. She saw the isolation in him, the kind that turns people into ghosts long before they die. When she finished bandaging him, he nodded once, a gesture of silent gratitude. Then, without ceremony, he lit the small gas burner, placed a dented pot on top, and brewed coffee from a tin. The bitter aroma filled the room. He poured 2 cups, handed one to her. "No sugar," he said. She smiled faintly. "Thank you." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They drank in silence, the rain whispering against the cracked windows. Later that night, she found him at the table, laptop open, papers scattered around him. Lines of financial data glowed across the screen, names, account numbers, offshore transfers. "Are you still working?" she said quietly. He didn't glance up. "It doesn't stop. There's something bigger behind those files. My father's name was just one of many they buried." She stepped closer, recognizing a familiar seal on one of the pages, the insignia of the federal court where her father served. Her breath caught. "You're investigating the case that put him away." He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Someone has to. The law failed him." She wanted to defend her father, to say not all judges were corrupt, but the conviction in Damien's eyes silenced her. Instead, she simply said, "You're not doing this for revenge, are you?" He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "No, for truth. Revenge doesn't change anything. Truth might." Hours passed. Isabella dozed off on the couch, exhaustion overtaking fear. Damien kept working, the glow of the laptop painting his face in cold light. When he finally looked over, she had curled beneath his jacket, asleep. Something in his chest tightened. He rose quietly, fetched a thin blanket from the cabinet, and draped it over her shoulders. For a moment he stood there, studying the peaceful lines of her face, the faint tremble of her breath. "Foolish girl," he murmured under his breath. "You shouldn't trust me." But as he watched her sleep, he realized that, for the first time in years, someone had. Outside, the storm eased into a soft drizzle. The city exhaled, its chaos dimming to a lull. And in that hollow, forgotten apartment, 2 broken strangers found a fragile kind of calm. They didn't speak of it, didn't name it, but somewhere between the coffee's bitterness and the hush of the rain, trust began to bloom, quiet, trembling, and real. Morning crept into the cracks of the old building, dull and colorless. Isabella woke to the faint static hum of an old television echoing through the next room. Damien stood motionless in front of it, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his shoulders rigid. On screen, a newscaster's voice cut through the silence. "E-breaking news. Isabella Hale. daughter of federal judge Robert Hale, vanished last night during her high-profile wedding to businessman Ethan Walters. Authorities are investigating a possible abduction. Her picture filled the screen, a smiling bride in white, perfect, pristine. Damien's jaw clenched. When Isabella stepped closer, he turned, eyes burning. "You didn't tell me your name." Her breath hitched. I didn't think it mattered." He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. The headline blazed across the screen again, "Daughter of Judge Hale Missing." He shut the TV off with a hard click. The silence after was heavier than the rain. "Your father," he said slowly, each word measured like the pull of a trigger, "is Robert Hale." She nodded cautiously. "Yes, you know him?" Damien laughed once, low, bitter. "Know him?" He stepped closer until she could see the storm behind his eyes. "Your father sentenced mine to 20 years in prison." Isabella froze. "That's not possible." He slammed his hand against the wall, making her flinch. "Don't lie to me. Lorenzo Moretti, does that name sound familiar?" He was painted as a monster, a trafficker, but the evidence that put him away, he jabbed a finger toward her, came from your father's courtroom. "I don't—" She stumbled back, shaking her head. "You're wrong. My father, he's a good man. He always believed in justice." "Justice?" Damien's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You call it justice when men in suits choose who burns and who walks free? He didn't just sentence my father, he destroyed my family." His voice cracked on the last word, raw and unguarded. She wanted to step closer to speak, but he turned away from her, pacing like a caged animal. "Get in the room," he ordered quietly. "What?" "I said get in the room." He pointed toward the narrow door at the end of the hall. "Until I decide what to do with you." Fear and disbelief tangled inside her, but something in his face stopped her from arguing. She walked into the small room. The door slammed behind her and the lock clicked. On the other side, Damien pressed his forehead against the door, eyes closed. Inside, Isabella sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, hands shaking. For a long while, there was only the hum of rain against the window. She could hear him pacing outside, hear the scrape of metal, his gun being checked, loaded, unloaded again. Finally, she spoke, her voice muffled through the door. "My father didn't want to do it." The sound of footsteps stopped. "He told me, the night before that trial, he said he wished he could walk away, but people threatened him. Powerful people. They said they'd kill my mother if he didn't convict." There was no answer. "I saw him burn the evidence, Damien. I was 14. He thought I was asleep, but I saw him cry while the papers turned to ash." The silence stretched, deep and heavy. "He wasn't the villain," she whispered. "He was a man trapped in a system that only pretends to be just." A chair scraped across the floor. Damien sat down heavily on the other side of the door, the sound of his breath uneven. "Do you have any idea," he said quietly, "what it's like to watch your father rot behind bars while the men who ruined him buy their way out? I spent my life believing Judge Hale was clean, righteous. My father used to curse his name like a ghost's." "My father cursed himself," she murmured. "Every day." He laughed again, softer this time, but the sound broke halfway. "Then maybe we both grew up with ghosts." Hours passed. The rain slowed to a mist. Neither of them moved. When night fell, Damien sat by the window, the pistol heavy in his lap. He stared at it, thumb brushing the metal. His reflection in the cracked glass looked like a stranger, half sinner, half survivor. From behind the door came her voice again, gentle but steady. "If you're going to kill me," she said, "do it. But don't let hate kill you first." The words hit harder than the bullet he'd taken. He dropped his head into his hands. For the first time in years, Damien felt something splinter inside, a soundless crack, deep and human. He didn't answer, but he set the gun down. In the room beyond, Isabella exhaled in relief she didn't understand. She didn't know if he believed her. She only knew that something in the air had changed. The tension wasn't rage anymore. It was sorrow, fragile and uncertain like the breath before dawn. Outside, the last of the storm faded, and in that silence both of them sat on opposite sides of a thin wooden door, separated by grief, bound by truth neither had chosen, but that now, unavoidably, belonged to them both. The city had been too quiet for a week. Damien felt it the way men like him always did. An unease that settled in his bones, the silence before a storm. He'd spent those days keeping his distance from Isabella. He told himself it was for her safety, that the space between them was a line he couldn't afford to cross. But every time he heard her footsteps in the next room, the lie grew heavier. On the 8th night, his phone buzzed with a number he recognized but hadn't seen in years. Marcus. Little cousin. The voice purred through static. You've gone soft. Word is you're hiding something. Or someone. Damien's pulse slowed. Stay out of it, Marcus. Oh, I would. But Lorenzo's men are restless. They think you've forgotten where you belong. You can't play the saint forever, Damien. Family comes first. Always. The line went dead. He turned and found the room empty. Isabella's jacket was gone. So was her bag. A flicker of panic sliced through his composure. He checked the street cameras he'd rigged years ago. One feed showed a van idling near the block an hour ago. Blacked out windows. No plates. She was gone. The warehouse Marcus had taken her to was one Damien knew too well. An old shipping terminal on the river, one his father used before prison. Flames licked at the night sky as he pulled up. The smell of gasoline and smoke hit like a memory. Inside, chaos. Crates overturned, papers burning, men shouting. Marcus stood on the catwalk above, smiling down at him. I warned you, cousin, you don't get to walk away from the family. You are the family. Damien's voice was steel. Where is she? Safe enough, man, for now. But if you want her back, you'll take what's yours. You'll lead again, just like your father raised you to. Below them, a shadow moved. Isabella, bound to a chair near the center of the warehouse, her face streaked with soot, eyes wide when she saw him. Damien! She shouted. Marcus's grin widened. Touching. The judge's daughter and the mafia prince, tragic poetry. Let her go, Marcus. Say you'll come back, swear it here and now in front of all of them. Damien's men know, Marcus's now, watched from the corners uncertain. They were loyal to fear, not family. Do it! Marcus taunted, stepping closer to the railing. Or she burns with the rest of your illusions. For a long heartbeat, Damien didn't move. Then, without warning, he fired one shot into the oil drum behind Marcus. The explosion ripped through the platform, sending Marcus sprawling. Flames erupted across the catwalk, swallowing the steel beams. Damien ran. He tore through the smoke, bullets ricocheting around him. The fire roared louder, consuming everything. Isabella coughed violently as the ropes burned against her wrists. Hold still, he rasped, cutting her free with a knife he'd pulled from his belt. You came back, she breathed. I wasn't leaving you. A steel beam groaned overhead. He grabbed her, shielding her body as it crashed to the floor beside them. The impact sent sparks flying. Through the haze, Marcus stumbled upright, blood streaking his temple. You'll die for her, cousin? He sneered. Damien met his gaze, calm in the chaos. No, I'll live without you. He fired again. The bullet shattered a gas pipe, and the wall exploded behind Marcus. The last Damien saw of him was his figure swallowed by fire. He turned to Isabella, pulling her to her feet. We have to go! They ran, dodging falling beams, coughing through the thick smoke. The exit door was half collapsed, flames curling around its frame. Damien pushed her through first, ignoring the searing heat against his back. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. They stumbled onto the pavement just as the roof caved in behind them with a deafening crash. Isabella fell to her knees, gasping. Damien knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. Her face was streaked with ash and tears. I thought, she started. He shook his head. Don't. I can't lose anyone else. His voice broke. Not again. She pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heartbeat. Behind them, the warehouse burned, the flames painting the river in gold and red. Damien watched it. The fire reflected in his eyes, his father's empire, his own history, all of it turning to ash. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the last flash drive, the one that could have kept him in power forever. For a second, he turned it in his hand, then tossed it into the blaze. Let it die, he whispered. He rose, still holding Isabella close. The two of them stood there as dawn broke over the city, the first light catching the smoke curling upward. It looked almost beautiful, like something ending and beginning at the same time. As the fire crackled behind them, Damien carried her toward the waiting car, the horizon bleeding red like the start of a new life. That night, The Moretti name burned in the warehouse, but in its ashes something else was born, something cleaner, something human. Not the heir of a crime dynasty, not the runaway daughter of justice, just a man who had chosen love over power, and a woman who believed he could be saved. The smell of smoke lingered for days. It clung to Damien's clothes, his skin, his thoughts. Every time Isabella closed her eyes, she saw the fire, the way he'd walked through it, the way the world had burned behind him. They didn't go far after the warehouse collapsed. Instead, they disappeared back into the shadows, back to the old apartment where it had all begun. The city didn't notice them slip in. New York never noticed anyone who wanted to stay unseen. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. The dust, the cracked windows, the faint hum of the old refrigerator that somehow still worked, but the silence between them had changed. Isabella spread a pile of charred papers across the table. Some pages were half-burned, others barely legible. Flash drives, scorched at the edges, lay beside them. "These are what's left," she said quietly. "Not enough for the police to act on." Damien leaned against the wall, his shirt torn and his arm bandaged. "Then we'll make it enough." He dropped a new folder onto the table. Copies of the digital backups he'd hidden years ago. Isabella blinked. "You kept them? Every file my father's men thought they'd erased. Every bribe, every offshore account, every name. Marcus didn't know I still had them." She met his eyes. "If we release this, you'll be hunted again. The people in those files, they're powerful, Damien. You're going after the same system that destroyed both our fathers." He shrugged. "Then maybe it's time it destroyed itself." There was no bravado in his tone, just quiet resolve. For the next week, they worked side by side. Isabella cross-checked the documents, organizing dates and statements. Her legal training sharpened the chaos into a pattern of undeniable truth. Damien wrote code, encrypting files and setting up anonymous drops to international journalists. At night, he brewed coffee and handed her a cup just as he had that first night. "You're better at this than most prosecutors I've met," he said once, half smiling. She glanced up, exhausted but glowing with determination. "Maybe because I finally have a case worth fighting for." By the 7th day, they were ready. Together, they pressed the final key that sent the evidence spiraling into the world, an avalanche of truth too large to bury. Within hours, the city erupted. News channels lit up with leaked documents. Names of senators, judges, CEOs scrolled across screens like confessions. Offshore accounts froze. Shell companies collapsed. The headlines screamed on political titans linked to global smuggling ring. New evidence in decades-old Moretti case. Isabella stood in front of the flickering TV, watching the empire unravel. "We did it," she whispered. Damien didn't smile. He watched the chaos with unreadable eyes. "They'll call me a traitor, maybe a terrorist. Let them," she said softly. "The truth doesn't need permission." He turned to her then, and for the first time his expression softened. "My father. He'll see this from his cell." She nodded. "He'll see what you've done for him and for everyone your family ever hurt." 2 weeks later, the news broke again. Lorenzo Moretti granted early release pending re-evaluation of conviction. The footage showed the older man being escorted from the federal penitentiary. Gray-haired, frail, but alive. The reporters swarmed him, shouting questions he ignored. Only one quote made it to air. "Justice comes late," he said, "but it comes." Damien watched the clip in silence. His hands trembled slightly, though his face remained calm. Isabella reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "You gave him back his life," she said. He shook his head. "No, I just stopped taking mine away." They sat in quiet for a while, the hum of the city filtering through the broken window. Isabella looked at him, the man everyone had once called a monster, the man who'd carried her from fire and darkness, now sitting under the pale light of morning with guilt and gentleness mixed in his eyes. "You realize what this means," she murmured. "You've undone what my father was forced to do." He turned toward her, voice low. "You mean I did what your father wanted to do and couldn't?" Something in her chest tightened. For the first time, she saw them not as enemies from two broken legacies, but as the result of the same wound, the cost of justice when it belongs to men instead of truth. "Damien," she said quietly, "you don't have to keep fighting." He gave a faint smile. "I'm not fighting anymore." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just rebuilding." Outside, the first sunrise in weeks broke through the clouds, streaking gold across the city skyline. For a moment, they just sat there, two people who had torn down an empire and were now learning how to exist in its ruins. And though no court or government would ever know it, justice had finally found its way back, not through laws or power or revenge, but through love, persistence, and the courage to begin again. 3 years later, the air in Maine smelled of salt and pine, the ocean glittering like a field of shattered glass under the summer sun. Life had finally learned to move slowly again. Damien Moretti stood on the porch of a seaside house, his sleeves rolled up, the faintest trace of laughter lines softening the sharpness of his face. The ghosts of New York still followed him sometimes, but here they didn't have much to say. Inside, Isabella's voice floated through the open window, steady, warm, filled with purpose. She was on a call with a client, pacing between the couch and the window. Her law firm had grown fast, her reputation even faster. The daughter of a once-fallen judge had become a symbol of redemption, the lawyer who never lost a case that mattered. At her feet, a little girl chased the sunlight, spilling through the curtains. "Emma, sweetheart," Isabella said, laughing as her daughter nearly tripped over a stack of law books. "You're supposed to be napping." The child's eyes, dark and deep like her father's, lit up with mischief. "But Mommy, I want to go to Grandpa's house." Isabella crouched down, brushing the little girl's curls from her face. "We're not going to Grandpa's house, love. We're going to bring Grandpa home." From the doorway, Damien smiled faintly, leaning against the frame. "She's been saying that all morning." Emma turned and ran to him, arms wide. "Daddy, is Grandpa really coming home today?" He scooped her up, kissing the top of her head. "Yes, he is. He's waited long enough." The drive to the federal penitentiary was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the sound of Emma humming a tune in the back seat. The Maine sky stretched wide above them, open, forgiving. Isabella reached across the console, her hand finding Damien. "You nervous?" He smiled without looking at her. "I've faced worse doors, but none that mattered this much," she said softly. He squeezed her hand. "No, none that mattered this much." When the gates opened, Lorenzo Moretti stood waiting on the other side. The years had hollowed him, silvering his hair and softening his edges, but his eyes, those dark, commanding eyes, were unmistakable. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Emma slipped from Isabella's hand and ran forward, her small shoes kicking up dust. "Grandpa!" she cried, her voice ringing through the open air. Lorenzo froze. He hadn't heard that word in decades. Slowly he knelt, arms open, and when she crashed into his embrace, the dam inside him broke. He held her tightly, tears streaking the weathered lines of his face. "You must be Emma," he whispered hoarsely. She nodded against his chest. "Daddy said you were brave." Lorenzo looked up then at Damien. His son stood a few feet away, still as stone, emotion caught behind restraint. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lorenzo stepped forward, Emma still in his arms. "You did it," he said simply. "You gave me back my name." Damien's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for a name." Lorenzo's eyes softened with something between pride and regret. "No, you did it for something I forgot existed. A life beyond power." He glanced at Isabella, who was watching quietly, her hand pressed over her heart. "She gave you that," Lorenzo said, "and you gave it to me." Damien couldn't find the words, so he did what his father never had. He stepped forward and embraced him. For the first time in 20 years, the Moretti men stood together under open sky, not as criminals, not as kings of anything dark, but as father and son. That evening, the family walked along the shoreline. Emma darted ahead, collecting shells, her laughter carried by the wind. Isabella slipped her hand into Damien's, her gaze following the sunset that painted the sea in orange and gold. "You ever think we'd make it here?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Some nights I didn't think I'd make it at all." She leaned into him. "You kept your promise. You left the darkness behind." He looked at her, his expression tender. "No, Bella. You were the light that showed me the way out." Ahead of them, Emma turned, waving. "Daddy, Mommy, look. I found a heart shell." Isabella laughed. Damien's arm slipped around her shoulders as they walked toward their daughter, the tide whispering against the sand. For the first time in a long, long while, Damien Moretti didn't feel like a man haunted by his past. He felt like a man forgiven, by love, by time, and by the small, bright life running toward him through the light of a new day. 6 years had passed since the night of fire and rain, the night Isabella Hale had fled her own wedding and leapt into a stranger's car. Now under a sky painted gold by the afternoon sun, that same woman stood once more in white. The garden overlooked the sea, rows of white chairs lined with soft rose petals. A string quartet played something slow, tender, music that sounded like forgiveness. Guests whispered, smiling, as the bride appeared at the top of the aisle. Isabella's gown shimmered in the sunlight, pure and unblemished. No torn silk, no raindrops, no blood. Just the quiet beauty of a woman who had earned her peace. At her side, Judge Robert Hale, older now, slower but proud, offered his arm. His eyes glistened as he looked at his daughter. "You look just like your mother," he whispered. Isabella smiled gently. "I hope I inherited her courage." He squeezed her hand. "You found your own." As they began the walk down the aisle, she saw them waiting ahead. Damien in a tailored navy suit, a rose pinned to his lapel, and their little girl Emma, now 6, standing between him and Lorenzo Moretti. Emma held a bouquet almost as big as her curls catching the light like threads of gold. When Isabella's gaze met Damien's, the world fell away. He was no longer the shadowed man she'd met that stormy night, no longer haunted, no longer running. There was a stillness in him now, the kind that only love and redemption can build. Robert Hale stopped at the front, turned to Damien, and placed his daughter's hand into his. "Take care of her," he said quietly. Damien met his eyes, his voice low and steady. "With my life, sir." Then Robert stepped back, his expression full of a father's peace, the kind that only comes when he knows his child is finally safe. The ceremony began. Lorenzo stood beside his son as best man. He looked smaller now, but stronger somehow, his posture straight, his eyes soft with pride. He leaned close and murmured, "If your mother were here, she'd be smiling." Damien swallowed hard, his throat thick. "I hope she can see us." The officiant's words drifted over the breeze, gentle and steady. "Love is not the absence of fear," he said, "but the choice to stay when fear comes." Isabella looked up at Damien, her voice trembling but sure. 3 years ago, I ran from a man I didn't love. Today I stand before the man I'll never run from again." His answering smile broke the last of her nerves. 3 years ago, you jumped into my car. Today I promise you'll never have to run again, because wherever you go, I'll be there first. Soft laughter rippled through the guests, and Emma giggled, clutching her flowers. When the vows ended, the sun dipped lower, casting everything in warm amber light. Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady. "Through chaos and calm," he whispered, "I still choose you." "Through fire and forgiveness," she replied, "I still choose you." The officiant smiled. "You may kiss your bride." He did, slowly, reverently, as if this were the first breath after years underwater. Cheers and applause followed, but all Isabella heard was the thud of his heartbeat against hers. Emma ran circles around them, throwing petals in the air, her laughter brighter than the fireworks that began to burst over the sea. Lorenzo watched from the edge of the aisle, wiping a tear. Robert Hale stood beside him. Two men once divided by the weight of justice and sin, now bound by the peace their children had created. As the night deepened, Damien led Isabella to the garden's edge. He knelt beside a small patch of earth and planted a single red rose. The petals glowed in the lamplight, rich and crimson, like blood, like love, like life reborn. He murmured, "For everything we were, for everything we'll be." And the final words, soft, almost like a prayer, carried over the music. Love doesn't erase the past. It teaches us to live the rest of our lives with a clean heart. And just like that, the storm that began in a rain-soaked city ended beneath a golden sky. Two souls, once strangers bound by danger, found their peace not in power but in love that refused to break. From a blood-stained wedding gown to a garden full of roses, Isabella and Damien's story proved that even in a world built on secrets, the heart can still choose light. If their journey moved you, if you believe in love that redeems, protects, and rebuilds, subscribe to Mafia Boss Love Stories, because even mafia hearts can learn to love again.